Most people believe mental illness is loud. They imagine breakdowns, visible suffering, or behavior that clearly looks wrong. But what if the most psychologically distressed person in the room is the calmest one? What if the mind in the greatest danger is the one that never complains, never slows down, and never asks for help? In clinical observation, mental illness rarely announces itself. It blends in. It hides behind routines, responsibilities, humor, and productivity. It wears the mask of being fine. Many individuals suffering internally are not failing at life. They are functioning so well that no one thinks to look closer. They show up on time, they smile at the right moments, they keep their emotions under control, and they move forward without causing concern. And that is precisely why their struggle goes unnoticed. Psychology teaches us that the mind does not always break loudly. Sometimes it adapts quietly. It learns to suppress emotion, to stay busy, to disconnect, to self-manage pain in socially acceptable ways. These adaptations look normal, even admirable. But over time, they can slowly exhaust the nervous system. What appears as strength may actually be survival. What appears as independence may be isolation. What appears as calm may be emotional shutdown. The most unsettling truth is this: many signs of mental illness are behaviors we reward. We praise people for being strong, self-reliant, productive, and unbothered. We rarely ask what it costs them internally. And because these behaviors don't alarm us, they often delay understanding, support, and healing. Today is not about labeling yourself or anyone else. It is about learning to see beneath the surface. Because when mental illness hides behind normal behavior, awareness becomes the most powerful form of care. Mental illness often hides behind what society defines as normal behavior because the human mind is remarkably adaptive. When emotional pain, anxiety, or internal conflict arises, the brain does not immediately shut down. Instead, it searches for ways to function while minimizing visible distress. Many people learn, consciously or unconsciously, to manage their suffering in ways that allow them to meet social expectations. They go to work, maintain relationships, fulfill responsibilities, and present emotional stability, even when their internal world feels chaotic. This ability to function can make mental illness nearly invisible, not only to others, but sometimes to the individual experiencing it. Cultural values play a powerful role in this concealment. Traits like productivity, independence, emotional control, and resilience are widely praised. When psychological distress expresses itself through these traits, such as overworking to avoid intrusive thoughts or suppressing emotions to appear strong, it is often rewarded rather than questioned. As a result, unhealthy coping mechanisms become reinforced. Over time, the person may begin to believe that their pain is simply part of life or a personal weakness rather than a legitimate mental health concern. Another reason mental illness remains hidden is fear of stigma, judgment, or being misunderstood. Many individuals learn early that emotional vulnerability leads to rejection or dismissal. To protect themselves, they mask their symptoms behind acceptable behaviors. This masking may preserve external stability, but internally it can deepen exhaustion, emotional numbness, and disconnection. Because the struggle does not look like suffering, it is frequently overlooked, allowing mental illness to persist quietly beneath the surface. The line between personality traits and psychological warning signs is often subtle, which is why emotional distress can go unnoticed for long periods. Personality traits are relatively stable patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that remain consistent across situations and over time. They usually do not cause significant inner suffering or interfere with a person's ability to function emotionally and socially. Psychological warning signs, on the other hand, often emerge as changes, intensifications, or rigid versions of behaviors that once felt natural but now serve as coping mechanisms for distress. What makes this distinction difficult is that warning signs frequently imitate personality. A person may describe themselves as naturally quiet, when in reality they have gradually withdrawn due to depression or anxiety. Someone may believe they are just a perfectionist, while their behavior is driven by fear, intrusive thoughts, or a need to control overwhelming uncertainty. In clinical observation, The key difference is not the behavior itself, but the emotional cost behind it. When a behavior is fueled by fear, avoidance, or chronic tension rather than preference or flexibility, it becomes a signal rather than a trait. Another important distinction lies in flexibility. Healthy personality traits allow adaptation. Psychological warning signs tend to be rigid, compulsive, or emotionally exhausting. The individual may feel trapped by their own behavior, even if it appears normal to others. When a pattern begins to limit emotional expression, reduce well-being, or persist despite negative consequences, it is no longer simply personality. It is communication from the mind that something deeper needs attention. Many behaviors that signal deeper mental strain are overlooked because they do not disrupt daily functioning in obvious ways. Instead of appearing chaotic or unstable, these patterns often look controlled, responsible, or socially acceptable. One such behavior is emotional suppression, where a person consistently avoids expressing distress and prides themselves on staying composed. While this may appear mature, it often indicates unprocessed anxiety or trauma accumulating beneath the surface. Another commonly missed sign is constant busyness. When someone fills every moment with activity, it may reflect an inability to tolerate stillness, as silence can trigger intrusive thoughts or emotional discomfort. Social withdrawal is also frequently misunderstood, especially when a person remains polite and functional. Avoiding deep emotional connection while maintaining surface interactions can signal depression or fear of vulnerability. Similarly, excessive self-criticism disguised as humor often reveals low self-worth rather than confidence. People who repeatedly belittle themselves may be expressing pain in a way that feels safe and non-threatening. Extreme independence is another overlooked signal. Refusing help and insisting on handling everything alone can reflect past emotional neglect or a belief that one's needs are a burden. Overthinking and relentless self-analysis may also point to anxiety or depressive rumination, particularly when thoughts feel intrusive rather than insightful. Lastly, delayed emotional reactions, remaining calm during stress but collapsing afterward, often indicate a nervous system operating in survival mode. Together, these behaviors form quiet signals of mental strain that deserve attention, not dismissal. Society often rewards these behaviors because they align closely with cultural ideals of strength, productivity, and emotional control. From an early age, people are taught that being reliable, self-sufficient, and unbothered is a sign of maturity and success. When someone suppresses emotion, works excessively, or handles stress without visible struggle, they are praised for being strong or disciplined, even if these behaviors come at a significant psychological cost. Because these patterns help maintain order and efficiency, they are rarely questioned, especially in fast-paced environments that prioritize output over well-being. Another reason these behaviors are rewarded is discomfort with vulnerability. Emotional pain makes many people uneasy, not because they lack empathy, but because it challenges the belief that control and effort can solve everything. When someone hides their distress behind normal behavior, it allows others to remain comfortable and avoid confronting difficult emotional realities. As a result, coping mechanisms that conceal suffering are socially reinforced, while visible expressions of distress are often stigmatized or minimized. Additionally, society tends to focus on external functioning rather than internal experience. As long as a person is meeting expectations, showing up, performing, and not causing disruption, their emotional state is seen as irrelevant. This external focus unintentionally teaches people to prioritize appearing well over actually being well. Over time, psychological warning signs become normalized, praised, and deeply embedded, making mental strain harder to recognize and even harder to address. Psychological awareness is essential, but it becomes harmful when it turns into self-labeling rather than self-understanding. Awareness is meant to help individuals notice patterns, emotional responses, and internal strain with curiosity and compassion. Self-labeling, however, often leads people to define themselves by a diagnosis they may not fully understand, creating fear, rigidity, or unnecessary identification with illness. In clinical psychology, awareness is not about declaring, "something is wrong with me," but about recognizing when the mind and nervous system are under pressure and may need support. Without balance, exposure to psychological concepts can cause individuals to interpret normal emotional fluctuations as pathology. Feeling anxious, withdrawn, or unmotivated at times is part of being human. Psychological awareness should help distinguish between temporary states and persistent patterns that cause distress or impairment. The goal is not to assign a label, but to ask gentler questions. Is this pattern helping me or exhausting me? Has it changed over time? Does it limit my emotional freedom? True awareness encourages responsibility without blame. It opens space for professional guidance rather than self-diagnosis, and for compassion rather than judgment. When people observe their inner experiences without attaching rigid labels, they remain flexible, hopeful, and open to growth. Psychological insight, when used correctly, becomes a bridge to healing, not a cage that defines identity. Mental illness does not always arrive as chaos or collapse. More often, it lives quietly inside routines, responsibilities, and behaviors that appear normal, even admirable. The greatest danger is not that these struggles exist, but that they go unnoticed because they do not disrupt the world around us. When suffering is silent, it is easy to dismiss, postpone, or normalize until the mind and body can no longer carry the weight alone. The purpose of psychological understanding is not to create fear or labels, but to sharpen awareness and deepen compassion. Not every behavior is a diagnosis, but every persistent pattern is a message. Listening to those messages early can prevent years of unnecessary pain. Strength is not measured by how well someone hides their struggle, and mental health is not defined by how functional someone appears. True resilience begins with honesty about emotional limits, internal strain, and the need for support. When we stop glorifying silent endurance and start valuing psychological well-being, healing becomes possible. The most powerful step is not pretending to be fine, but allowing the mind to be understood. Awareness is not weakness. It is the first and most courageous step toward mental clarity and recovery.